We're going to begin today in part 8, an incredible journey. The journey into Ahavas Hashem. A loving, deep, intimate relationship with God. How does business bring us there? I want us just to take stock before we start of how far we've come and how the Torah has educated us as businessmen. Because it took a very basic drive for money that uneducated, untrained by the Torah, would have guided us to build a life that looks very different from the life the Torah has painted for us. That drive for money would have made us, at best, a workaholic, whose hours would be totally uncontained. It would compromise all important relationships, commitments that we'd have to our wives, our children, our family, our friends, and build a life where business was number one. At worst, a life where we would compromise our own integrity, our own morality, sacrifice relationships, deal in a way which is dishonest in order to achieve our ends of owning wealth. The Torah has taken that drive for money and it has guided you into a life of the most incredible actions you could imagine. Tzedakah, the most important aseh of the Torah. That's what you'll become committed to in your life as a result of this drive for money. Talmud Torah. The Brisa says, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. There is no mitzvah, it trumps them all, it's worth all the mitzvahs together, and you are a person who's going to be wholeheartedly committed to this incredible mitzvah of learning Torah as a result of your drive for money. And then doing Hashem's will and placing it ahead of your own in all areas of life, in honesty, integrity, morality, tefillah. The Torah has built an Eved Hashem out of our desire to make money. Let's just take stock and appreciate how vastly different our life looks as a product of the Torah's guide to making money, as opposed to our natural desire and what it would have built. The Torah and the Rishonim call the approach that we've built until now Avodah Yira. It's serving God out of a fear of the consequences of our spiritual actions, realizing that there's certain critical mitzvahs, aseh, that we will do which will have an impact on our life positively, and there's certain aveiros which we have to stay away from because they'll have consequences negatively in our life. That's called Avodah Yira. It's self-centered. It's motivated around gain and our own loss. It's very motivating, but it is self-centered. Our journey through part 8 is to see and investigate how we can transform the engine room of our avodah, the driving force of our avodah, which at the moment is avodah miyira, it's yira. How do we transform that engine room to become ahava, that we can serve Hashem me'ahava, out of love, out of a relationship, out of a connection, without the self-interest? That's our journey. Before we begin our journey into ahava, I'd like to share with you what the Rishonim say about these two madregas, Avodah Miyira and Avodah Me'ava, so that we have a realism about the journey we're about to enter into, an appreciation for where we hopefully will be holding, that Avodah Miyira is something quite incredible, and a realization that Avodah Me'ava is an aspiration. We can always be hoping to get there. It's going to be a long, long journey. Let me share with you First of all, a gra which we learned together in Eben Shleima. And he says as follows: Eisek ha'olam hazeh be'yira, being engaged in this worldly activity, and he's talking about business, be'yira, using this midah of Yira, this tray of Yira, which we've inculcated throughout this series. Humoyel le Torah mitzvahs kezevad lagan. It helps your avodas Hashem and your learning of Torah like fertilizer to a garden. Yira is rocket fuel for your mitzvahs, and now we understand with absolute clarity why that is. It makes you a mitzvah machine. Our fear of the consequences and our anticipation of the rewards for doing the mitzvahs makes us wholeheartedly devoted to tzedakah, wholeheartedly devoted to Talmud Torah, restrained from all the things which are prohibited in the Torah. But it's the Yira which is driving an incredible commitment to Torah and mitzvahs. Says the Gra, this is not a bad thing. It's an incredible thing. It's fertilizer for the garden, that Yira. That level of serving God, Yira, is rocket fuel for mitzvahs and Torah. The Ahavas in Perek Daled lays out perhaps for us the most important foundation in this area. He says that the entire Torah is built on avodah me'yira. That's why throughout the written Torah, you only see the Torah speaking about the physical consequences of your action in this world. Long life, chores, financial wealth. It speaks to a person's physical needs in this world because that's the starting point of a person's growth. And so the Chovos Levavos calls avodah me'yira, he calls us ha'oras ha'Torah. It's the Torah's enlightenment for a person of how to live their life. And avodah me'ava, he calls ha'oras ha'seichel. It's a level up. And look what he says about these two different levels. He says as follows: Ki ha'oras ha'Torah hi akdamo mavoy el ha'oras ha'seichel. First of all, you need to know that serving Hashem out of this Torah enlightenment, a Torah which guides you to serve Hashem out of anticipation for reward or restraint as a result of fear of being punished, that's the necessary prerequisite and introduction to serving Hashem out of a relationship with Him, out of a relationship of love and connection and appreciation for what He's done. You can't get to Ahava unless you've started on the foundation which we've built, which is avodah me'yira. That's number one. Then he goes on to say an incredible thing. As somebody who doesn't fall short, doesn't cut corners at all in the fulfillment of the Torah's obligation for reward and punishment, but you do every single mitzvah absolutely perfectly, you will be on the level of the purest Chasidim. Avodah me'yira. But you're still on the level of the most pure Chasidim. And you are befitting to receive reward for your service in this world and the next. It's an incredible madrega. To even do what we've described until part 7, if you can actually live a life like that, wholeheartedly devoted, committed with energy and passion to doing mitzvahs, and your driving motivation is desire for money, you one of the Hasidim Azokim. Reward in this world, reward in the next, incredible madrega. And somebody who manages to graduate out of that, to get the level of avodah shehi min haseichel, which is what we're going to call for now avodah me'ava, yagia al madregas hanavim. You've reached nevuah. That's a level that's unique to Nevi'im, ubechira elyon chasidim, and the choicest, highest, most elevated chasidim. It's a madrega we can't imagine, inaccessible in this world, in our world where we're at here. Never met a Navi. So we have to be realistic and know that the aspiration to actually serve Hashem, Yira, is something incredible. It's incredible. And our hope of getting higher than that is possible, and you can graduate minusculely a little bit, level by level, away from that. But to actually reach Ahava, this Avodas HaSeichel, highly unlikely for us. Aspirational, but highly unlikely. And I think that context is very important. And we'll see from the Rambam that I'm going to share with you now, I think crucial. The Rambam is in Pirush HaMishnayos, in Perek Chelek of Sanhedrin. And he's describing the most detailed way, the journey of a person to go from Avodah Yira to Avodah Me'ava. It's a piece, we're only going to touch on a few segments of it now, but it's absolutely fundamental to a person's service. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah says that Antignois ish soichoi kibel mishimon atzadik. He received the transmission from Shimon HaTzadik. Well, Yaomer used to teach the following: Al tiyu kavodim hashamshem esarav amanas lekabel pras, eleheve kavodim hamashamshem esarav shelo amanas lekabel pras. He says, don't be like a servant who serves his master for reward. Rather be like a servant who serves his master not for reward. And the Rambam says the following incredible thing. He says, V'he'eshimu l'antignos ish soichoi. The Chachamim chastised Antignos. B'biroi lahamon ma'ashibir. For revealing to the multitude of people, to the masses, what he revealed in that Mishnah. The Amru Bazeh, and the Chachamim said later on in Pirkei Avos, as a chastisement of Antignos, he's haru b'divrei, be careful what you teach. Because that teaching was damaging for the Roiv Am. You see, if the entrance and introduction to Ava is Avodah Yira, you have to go through that journey of serving Hashem for your own vested interests. You have to. It's the introduction prerequisite. It's the starting point. It's the only hope of entering the gateway of Ava. Then says the Rambam, the Chachamim said to Antignos, you dare not teach the Hamoin. Don't serve Hashem for vested interests, for rewards. You're discouraging them from entering the pathway to Ava. They're not going to engage in the most important work of their life. They may never reach Ava, but they definitely won't get to Ava if they don't travel the journey of Avodah Yira. And so Avodah Me'ava is aspirational, but you have to be wholeheartedly committed and vested to Avodah Yira. And if you're not, you'll definitely never get to Ava. And they were upset with Antignos because he took away the rocket fuel from most people, because they start to feel bad, guilty, less than, unworthy, when they realize that the driving force and engine room of their avodah is their own personal vested interest, in our instance for money. Says the Rambam, don't do that. This is critical. Avodah Yira is a critical component of serving God. And it's the introduction to Ava. You have to go through that step. And he says as follows: V'ein hehamon mafsidim mikol v'kol. The vast majority of people, they lose absolutely nothing. Ba'asoisam ha'mitzvahs be'yiras ha'onesh v'tikvas ha'schar. When they do mitzvahs out of fear from being punished or for anticipation of being rewarded, they lose nothing. Ela sheheim bilti shleimim. They're not shleimim, but they lose nothing in their avodah. V'ulam ze toiv lahem. On the contrary, he says, serving Hashem like this is good for them. Ad sheyeh lahem koyach, it will give them the energy, the hergel and consistency, the hishtadlus and effort, ba'asiyas ha'torah, in the fulfillment of Torah, umizeh. And out of that energy, consistency, and effort that they're putting to their avodah, they'll come to see the truth and they will become an oived me'ava. It's mind-blowing, this Rambam. Do you know how you give birth to avodah me'ava, out of how you give birth to a love of God, you have to do the mitzvahs. You have to learn Torah with energy, consistency, and effort. How do you get energy, consistency, and effort? What will you use as your motivation? Says the Rambam, you have no choice. In your starting point, you have to use Yira. You have to use your own personal vested interests, because they will give you the energy, they will give you the consistency, they will give you the effort that's required, because it's the actions of Torah that are going to give birth to Ahavas. We're going to explain in the continuation of this part. But you have to be engaged in the actions of Torah with that level of intensity for Ahava to be born. And so says the Rambam, if you take away that engine room, if you feel bad about using your own vested interests, about using chemdas moment to drive you to do mitzvahs, to give tzedakah, to learn Torah, to restrain from Ahavas, if you feel bad, then you just won't give as much. And you won't learn as hard and as much. You won't be as consistent. You won't restrain as much from Ahavas. And if you don't do those mitzvahs as much, with as much koach, consistency, effort, Ahava will never be born. And so Yira, what we've built until now, avodah Yira, is the necessary prerequisite for everything, because it's what energizes our mitzvah adherence. And without energized, consistent mitzvah adherence, there's no hope ever of getting to Ahava. So take stock, appreciate, we've set up a monumentous task even until now, just to be an Eved Hashem Yira. We're now going to journey on an aspirational path, which eventually ends up at Nevuah. Bechirei Elyon Chasidim, we probably will never get there. But we can journey along the track, graduate little minutiae of graduations from where we start, getting closer and closer to there. And I look so forward to laying down the foundations of that journey with